Physical strength. If you compare a St. Bernard dog, heavy and slow, with a Jack Russell Terrier, all bone and muscle in a small package of nervous activity, you can get a sense that the body and the behavior go together. The St. Bernard dog is not going to race around the house, yapping and perpetually chasing a ball, no matter how warm the temperature is, whereas the Terrier can't help but do it. Or consider the differences between a raven and a hummingbird. The raven is long-lived, big, careful and slow. It flaps about in loops, looking for small animals to snatch up or for carcasses that stay where they are. The hummingbird's heart races hundreds of beats per minute. The highest recorded has been 1,260 beats per minute, or 21 beats a second. So fast that the human ear cannot distinguish one beat from another. Then, as we expect, we see the behavior that corresponds with such a body. The thousands of miles that the hummingbirds travel. Their energetic hovering in midair, in the forced and strenuous placeholding. Their sudden movements like the shot of an arrow, or how the male dives 80 feet at 50 miles an hour to court a female. Similarly, every typical behavior of boys can be seen as a natural expression of the forms of their bodies. The boys have more muscle mass and a higher metabolism. Therefore, they crave action, and they grow restive and irritable without it, just as a border collie in an apartment would. The boys have muscles that are designed to grow stronger. Their potential for muscle growth is exponential. Think of football, or wrestling, or playing King of the Hill. Wherever you go in the world, you will find games which boys invented that stress the muscles and bruise the bones. It's ubiquitous, perhaps even universal. A boy who lifts weights is making tiny tears in his muscles, which actually builds his muscle mass. The needs of the body explain what is otherwise hard to understand philosophically, that it feels good not only to tackle your opponent on the open field, but even to be tackled, to come down with incredible force against the hard ground, and to get up and do the same thing over and over again. All of this is a circuitous way of saying the male body is designed to physically exert itself in combat, competition, and exercise. Engaging in this allows them to happily obey the imperatives of their nature, a form of physical mastery through blood, sweat, and grit. That is why so many of us find it admirable. Physical strength is not just aspirational in itself. Everyone can appreciate a well-built physique. It is also a symbol of physical mastery and mental strength. It represents someone who has trained their physical faculties through repeated work, and someone who, if needed, could defeat them in a test of physical mettle, and perform the tasks he's supposed to be relied on to keep society afloat. It's a reminder that beauty and optimal performance must be maintained through pain, effort, and dedication. It tells those looking at it that this is a man of patience, continuous effort, self-discipline, and proficiency. Theodore Roosevelt was by far the strongest president we've had. Young boys, including the boxer Gene Tunney, were known to try to emulate their hero's physique by doing chest exercises. Children would even punch his Boris chest whenever they got the chance to meet him. Theodore had an indefatigable passion for exercise. At the age of 14, he got beat up one day and vowed to never let that happen again. He then spent his time honing his skills as a pugilist. Upon becoming president, he broadened his scope and practiced jujitsu, wrestling, and judo, even inviting people into the White House to fight him. Yes, he could be on the street, see someone that looks tough, and say, "Hey, do you want to fight?" And if they said yes, he would take them to his office. The things people make up for Chuck Norris jokes, Roosevelt actually did. His voracious appetite for combat led him to, on one occasion at least, be observed wrestling a sumo wrestler. He was never a master martial artist or anything, but he did get his way up to a brown belt in judo and was documented as being a born fighter. He was 5'9" at 200 pounds, and while critics may argue that he looks a bit pungy nowadays, he was an undeniable force of brute strength. Just ask anyone unlucky enough to receive a blow from him. Professional boxers were the ones who said that Teddy was a born fighter who would repay their ferocious blows with interest, even if he lacked a bit in the skill department. Yes, Roosevelt fought professional boxers. When he won his second mayoral campaign for New York, I say again to really highlight the point, he would literally randomly challenge people who would look like they would be a tough boxing match. Eventually, he started tracking down professional boxers. He only stopped this practice because he went blind in his left eye after a particularly gutting punch to the face, irreparably dislodging his retina and neural connections. What's crazy is that he has a very small frame. He was noted to have very small hands and feet. This is because he was born with severe asthma, deafeningly severe at that. He had to be homeschooled his entire life because he couldn't afford not having immediate medical care with him throughout an entire day. Another story of his gentleness comes in February 1886. The story begins when Roosevelt's boat was stolen by 3 outlaws. He could have just let them go, fearing for his own safety, but Roosevelt was too upset to not enact justice. He builds a makeshift boat and sets off down the frozen Little Missouri River to track down the thieves. After several days and covering nearly 40 miles, Roosevelt caught up to the thieves. Despite the difficulties and danger involved, Roosevelt managed to capture the 3 men without any bloodshed. The river became too frozen to continue sailing, so he marched the thieves on foot, alone, for 40 hours straight, keeping himself awake as the criminals slept by reading Tolstoy. Given the fact that he was in the middle of nowhere, with criminals who would, if given the chance, kill him in a moment's notice, he was within every right to execute them and save time, energy, and peace of mind. Something the vast majority of people probably would have done. But Roosevelt felt as though they still deserved a fair trial. Because of this honorable act, one of the criminals from the prison cell thanked him and called him a sentinel of justice. When he was 17, he was a 5'9", 130-pound skinny kid. Here are the measurements if you're curious. That being said, if you know a lot about fitness, you would know that the size of your frame is of paramount import in the contest of looking as large and intimidating as possible. Theodore trained his body to such an extent that despite his petite frame, he was still able to look imposing. And of course not just look the part, but actually embody it. He overcame his asthma and weak, small frame with nothing but sheer, unwavering, indefatigable force of will. An example that also serves to underscore his commitment to leadership is a story from 1906. In 1906, he tried to institute a fitness test for the military. Upon his request, he received complaints from officers that the test was too strident. So, Teddy took the test himself and passed with flying colors. He was 48 at this time and dominated a test deemed too difficult for people half his age. As another testament to his unshakable will, Roosevelt was shot in the chest while campaigning in Milwaukee for a 3rd presidential term under his newly created Progressive Party. The bullet pierced through a part of his glasses and a 50-page copy of his speech. Instead of going to the hospital like a sane, normal person would, he proceeded to give a 90-minute speech with a bullet still lodged in his chest. Thanks to his experience as an anatomist and a hunter, he figured that the bullet had not reached his lung and that he could wait to receive medical treatment. After losing his 3rd term bid, he set out on an expedition to South America to traverse what he called the River of Doubt. During his travels, he got injured and required surgery. He proceeded to get a ragtag, off-the-grid surgery and survived the procedure with no anesthetic, without even flinching. At 50 years of age, he had vigor and strength rare of someone half his age. Roosevelt was told at a young age that he should pursue a calm and soft life, looking to find a career behind a desk. He obviously didn't heed these words, but I'd wager that he probably ended up living longer because he chose to live this strenuous life. He died at 60, but given his issues as a child, most people didn't expect him to make it to 50. Another example of Roosevelt's courage is in his audacious forays into grizzly bear hunting. If you know anything about hunting, you would know that grizzly bears are some of the toughest animals out there. Native Americans state, in the presence of a grizzly bear, one must show respect and humility. The bear's strength is a reminder of the power of nature and the respect we must hold for all living things. It helps them keep perspective and understand where they fit in the spectrum of life. To capture a grizzly bear was an honor deemed almost impossible. Such a feat was a testament to a hunter's extraordinary courage, strength, and skill, marking him as a figure of great respect and admiration among his people. In the 19th century, they used to hold animal fighting competitions, and it got boring for everyone because everyone who watched it knew the grizzly would just dominate. That being said, Roosevelt remained undeterred by these formidable creatures. He regularly hunted these beasts and decorated his house with them. On some occasions, as chronicled in his biographies, he had direct and personal encounters with them, and still came out alive. He had an intrepid spirit and unyielding resolve in the face of nature's most menacing perils. Another example is in how he got into a brawl in Montana, where his opponent had a gun, and somehow Mr. Roosevelt came out on top. In February 1884, Roosevelt faced a devastating personal tragedy when his mother, Mittie, and his first wife, Alice, died on the same day. Utterly enveloped by profound grief, he sought solace in the untamed expanses of the rugged American West. As he soldiered his way to Montana, a local bully and gunslinger, who had a reputation for causing trouble, entered the saloon where Roosevelt was staying. The man, likely intoxicated, began to harass and insult Roosevelt, calling him Four Eyes due to his now iconic spectacles. Roosevelt calmly asked the man to stop, but the bully continued his taunts and eventually drew his gun, threatening Roosevelt. In an astonishing display of alacritous speed and bullish strength, Roosevelt struck the man in the jaw, causing him to drop his gun. Roosevelt continued to pummel, subdue, and disarm the bully with relentless vigor until he was thoroughly neutralized. Theodore conducted himself not only with courage, but with poise and stoicism. Where most men would hesitate, he was focused. He was a man undeterred by the most fearful of encounters. The vicissitudes of not only civilized life, but nature itself were not enough to make this man fear. Roosevelt was against leading in a way that could be construed as hypocritical. When the Spanish-American War was underway, Theodore led his Rough Riders up Kettle Hill, something orthodox military strategists deemed impossible. Namely, he stored and captured a higher redoubt, a redoubt being a temporary fortified defense structure used to protect soldiers and artillery, over an open ground using weapons inferior to, and fewer than, the Spanish forces who were securely ensconced and entrenched in Kettle Hill. The taunt towards politicians is that they are armchair and parlor jingos who wish to see others do the things they only advocate for. Theodore could not be said to be guilty of such an accusation. He was every bit as fiery, dynamic, and daring as the doctrines he preached. He didn't go into war recklessly, but with discernment, trepidation, and moderation of spiritual exhilaration. He knew that whatever good he might be able to do is limited insofar as the group is able to follow the lead of its head member. So he knew he needed to go out into war in order to fully justify his power. So do it he did, with expert skill at that, vindicating and augmenting his eminent position of leadership. This contrasts what is essentially the Sir Galahad theory of politics, which essentially boils down to, I will win because my heart is pure. Now, I agree that insofar as your personal security and assurance is concerned, yes, it is true that you will win because your heart is pure. But that is not how ideas are disseminated. That's not how culture at large is changed. And thus, that's not how to make the most of your position in leadership. In the realm of politics, you can be right and speak the truth, but if you don't have the power to properly disseminate that truth, your words effectively mean nothing. Theodore augments his power and uses it to promote as much goodness as he can, wherever he finds himself.